First, I want to talk a bit about Europe. So just a general question, what are the biggest challenges, in your opinion, that are facing the EU right now and the EU's unity and solidity going forward?
It's easier to think of it the other way around. Is there a single thing that isn't challenging Europe at the moment? Our continent as a whole has so many problems in the years ahead. And Britain, in my view, I'm Brexiteer, as it were, a Eurosceptic, but I don't believe that every problem we face is solved by Brexit. Every problem is still before us after that. But there is, for the remaining parts of the Eurozone, obviously there's going to be an ongoing crisis, there's going to be an ongoing financial crisis. We're going to be tied up with a lot of that, certainly a lot more than a lot of people think. But that's just one of them. My own view, the thing that has interested, indeed detained me most in recent years has been the issues of migration and cohesion within European society, which I think are incredibly considerable and understated. We've been sort of getting through them by hoping it'll be okay, and I'm not sure how long that lasts.
I'll move towards the French elections for just one question before going back to Brexit. The first round of the French elections is drawing closer. Macron has recently jumped in first place in the polls ahead of Le Pen. Le Pen is second and Fillon is third. What would be the impact of a Le Pen win, and why is she drawing so much support right now?
Well, I think it's important not to overstate her support. And it's true that in the recent polls, the poll today comes out as we speak, is I think seen as being a slight outrider, putting Macron slightly ahead. But first of all, I think the British press was sort of obsessed by this story as if it's only a Le Pen story. My prediction would be that what happens is what happened in 2002. Like her father, she gets through to the second round and then can get no further because everyone will cohere against her. The only scenario I think of that not being possible is if there is a disaster in the Macron campaign once we're past the first round. The impact, if it were to happen, as I say, unlikely as I think it actually is, if it were to happen, that's a real political earthquake in a period where we're much given to overstatement about political earthquakes. That really would be it. It's very hard to see how the EU continues in any recognisable form when one of the two most central states is led by somebody who wants out.
Fair enough. So I will go back to Brexit for a bit. Do you think generally that Britain made the right choice in leaving the EU?
Yes, I do, but I think it's something which is not going to be clear for a long time to come. It's not going to be clear for years. We're not going to see the benefits of that for some time, but my own views on it were that it was as it were fundamental objections to what was happening. But I don't think anyone should be too dogmatic either way on this. I think I find the whole, if I can say so, the whole Brexit row in this country has become sort of saddening to me. There are all sorts of challenges which we face post-Brexit. But there's been this endless desire to replay the referendum of last year, an endless attempt by both sides, or I might say all sides, to avoid any admissions of negative things to do with the case that they've made. And the case of Brexit will have negatives. There will be negative things in the years ahead, just as there would have done if we'd remained intimately entwined in the EU project. But as I say, my own view is that we're always going to be better off out. And at the very least, I think we could all agree on this, at the very least we will have more of a meaningful say in our own future, and whatever that is.
Speaking of dogmatism on the campaign trail, immigration has been a key issue in the Brexit debate and the Brexit referendum. Do you think the fear of excessive immigration was justified, or were voters, let's say, led astray by a deceptive Leave campaign?
The interesting thing about it is that quite often with my experience of elections in general, sometimes you remember them differently from how they actually were. The official Leave campaign in the run-up to the referenda was actually very worried about talking about immigration. It's true that, partly this is, I think, the reason for the Leave victory is that there was a benefit of competition, as it were, on the Leave side, which there wasn't on the Remain side, that spoke as a monolith. But actually, the official Leave campaign was very noticeably worried about talking about immigration. You can take from that what you will. Maybe they thought that vote was already in the bag, but I don't think it played such a big role as people thinking in retrospect. But it's obviously there. It's under every major conversation in Europe. I mean, poll after poll that comes out shows that the political class of all political stripes is really very, very far away from the feelings of the European publics. And I, for one, regard that gap as being very dangerous and think it should be filled. But I don't think that that it played such a role as I say, as people think.
Why is it that London, a city with 37% of its population foreign-born, voted overwhelmingly to remain? Do you think there are better conditions for integration in London? And what are the ways a government can favor the integration of immigrants?
There are several reasons for this, aren't there? People often focus on a single one that benefits them. For instance, there's an argument that's quite often made that says the reason why Londoners vote for remaining in the EU and vote for broadly, in favour of immigration, for instance, is because they've had lots of immigration, they love it, and they just want more. There are other interpretations of those stats. For instance, people who didn't love it have left. And that's almost always not taken into account in those stats. But in general, I mean, people who live in cities like London are, I think, by nature now more internationalist in their outlook. I mean, I was at the Dutch Cultural Centre in London in the city for an event a week ago as an observer, I might add. And it was, every single person in the audience, all of whom were sort of Dutch people who work in the city of London. When there was a poll of the audience, I think 3 hands went up when somebody said who was actually in favour of Brexit. Well, that's inevitable. I mean, the sort of people who are Dutch finance people working in London are going to be in favour of harmonisation. And so I mean, that's the norm. I don't think it's particularly to be derided, and there's nothing much anyone can do about it. That's the reality of living in the cities like London, which there aren't very many of, by the way. I mean,
definitely. I'll transition to the U.S. for a bit. Just generally, what do you make of Donald Trump's victory, and what are the factors that led the country to this unexpected result?
There are several things you can do in punditry, by the way. One of them is to always claim that you predicted and saw everything, and I'm not going to play that game.
Cool.
I didn't expect Mr. Trump to achieve the presidency. I didn't think he'd get the nomination. I mean, I thought it was going to stop way before the Republican convention. And I remember exactly where I was sitting in the US, staying with some friends when the New York Post came out because Mr. Trump had insulted John McCain. Do you remember that? And I remember saying, that's it. That's it. Bye-bye, Mr. Trump. That's the end of him. So as I say, I'm not going to. After last year, I refused to make any more political predictions, pretty much. But no, I didn't see it happening. I think it's obviously an enormous middle finger, significant amount of the public to the establishment, and sometimes that's necessary. I don't think, by the way, the endless gloom about him is warranted any more than the excessive admiration. This is very early in the presidency, and I don't think it's fair to make too many assessments at this stage. And I also, by the way, I just abhor it in American politics in general these days. Any time, I mean, I remember with the Obama first term, sort of a couple of weeks in, people saying, maybe this president's going to be impeached. And you think, really, just give him more than a few weeks.
Okay. To tread on Donald Trump just a little bit more, during the campaign trail, he was very vocal about Hillary Clinton not being able to say the words radical Islamic terrorism. Why are political leaders so reluctant to use these two words together? And what's the extent of their connection, I guess?
They're reluctant for I think, an understandable reason. I mean, words do matter in politics, and the signs you give off matter. There are good reasons to worry that the general public might think you're saying something you're not, and that was a worry in the Bush years. It was a worry in the Obama years. I think the Obama years they went very, very much too far in that. And it's also the case, by the way, that in opposition, political parties and political movements can often become very lazy. And I think there was a certain laziness in the Republican camp during the Obama years on this. A lot of the work that could have been done in this area was not done. And instead we had the talking points about it. And the chief talking point on the Republican side about this was, the president won't even use these words. My view was always, well, he should use the words, but that's not going to solve it. That's not going to address the issue. That's a start. That's where you'd be starting from.
How should the issue be addressed, do you think?
Well, my view is that from a much broader understanding than that of it, it's an exceptionally complex subject. This because you are treading not only on domestic, on foreign, but domestic issues. My own view is that the involvement of the American state in this is already pretty much fine on the most visceral counter-terror bit of it. The Obama administration's counter-terrorism, the FBI's, the domestic counter-terrorism stuff is pretty good. They stop major attacks and so on. It's the level beneath that they would ordinarily be needing to occupy themselves with.
Okay.
So who is it that is training the police force in their religion awareness days? Who is it that's teaching, as it were, law enforcement and so on, the broader picture of it? And I think if you look at that story, that is quite worrying. You really don't want some of the groups who've been moving into that area. But as I say, this is the level below the criminal. The Obama administration wasn't allowing anyone to fly planes into towers either. But in my view, as I say, it's the level beneath that. It's the level beneath the criminal. It's the societal self-education level that's the bit that's most wanting, actually. And as I say, I just am very struck that a lot of Republican critics of the Obama years failed to involve themselves in the detail they should have done during that time.
This last question about Israel. Israel's expansion of settlements into Palestinian territory has been criticized by many, even ruled illegal, shall we say, by the International Court of Justice. Do you think Israel is overstepping its bounds in doing so, or is this legitimate?
Well, yeah, since the UN resolution in December, of course, the legal standing of this is being seen to toughen. My own view is that I'm not in favour of expansion of settlements. They're called. I think that you have to realise which ones are actually expansion of territory and which ones are on areas which, in any final status agreement, are obviously on the Israeli side of the land swaps. That detail is not often covered, by the way, in the press here. My own view is that it's an issue, but it's not the only issue. I think my own view is that there are many, many other issues before you get to that one that are holding up the peace process. And by the way, the one that's most problematic is the question of the right to return, which now extends to millions of people. Any other conflict that wouldn't be permitted. But my own view is that is one of, if not the biggest, stalling point. But look, I mean, it's a conflict, a land dispute, which may well go on for the rest of our lives. It may well go on for many, many more generations. There are unsolved conflicts around the world, unsolvable conflicts, arguably. I think that there are things that both sides can do in the Israeli-Palestinian dispute to get towards a peace deal that they're not doing. But, there are a lot of things that the Turkish government is not doing to alleviate the problem in Cyprus. And we don't spend 1% of the time that we spend on this issue. My view, by the way, very quickly, you didn't ask this, but my view is that that's because we have a false idea. Nobody believes that, for instance, the Eurozone crises would be solved if you could unite Cyprus. Okay? Nobody believes that every problem of the EU would go away if you could just solve the Cyprus problem. But there has been for a long time a view that you could solve all problems in the Middle East if you solved the Israeli-Palestinian dispute. It was one of David Miliband's things when he was foreign secretary. It's a Labour thing, it's a Conservative thing. Everybody makes the argument. And I think that's just fundamentally not the case. And that, amazingly enough, if they did come to an agreement, which I wish they would, but I don't think that if they would, the economy of Yemen would boom and that the Saudis would suddenly understand the point of women's rights and so on. So it's important, but I think there's an overstating of its importance.
Fair enough. Okay, well, Douglas Murray, thank you so much for your time.